Okay, good afternoon all. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And welcome to Space Door's 28th Insights Live. So the subject for today's discussion is universal design, a holistic approach to the workspace experience. Before we launch, I'd like to introduce our panelists here today. So we're joined by Susan Dixon, Head of Workplace Europe and Americas of Standard Chartered Bank. Hello, Susan.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, and we also have Omar Ramirez, Head of Workplace Services at Miro. Hello, Omar.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hello, and Lisa Kong, Principal and Regional Interior Design Leader at DLR Group. Hello, Lisa.
Good morning.
Hello. And then from Space Door, we also have Andrew Baxter, Sales Manager of the UK region. Hello, Andrew.
Afternoon, Nick.
Hello, and myself, that's Nick Stedman, VP Marketing. So all in all, we have a very experienced panel, and I'd like to thank our panelists for their time and also our audience here. Thank you for joining. We really do appreciate it, and we're very excited to be discussing this subject, and I hope you learned something too. So before we launch in, I would like our panelists to introduce themselves individually and tell us a bit about themselves. So Susan, if you could go first, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from.
Thanks, Nick. My name is Suzanne Dixon. I'm the Regional Head of Workplace for Europe and Americas at Standard Chartered Bank. I've been in the role for the last 3 years, and before that I was at Lloyd's, but mainly been within the financial and tech sector. It's quite a privilege to be joining you guys in this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate that. Omar?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. Omar Ramirez, Head of Workplace Services at Miro. Kind of have grown my career in the tech space, going from Google when I was much younger, all the way to Miro now, and a bunch of companies in between. Actually, as of Monday, I'll be starting up my own consultancy as well, Affordances, which will be helping companies actually determine their workplace path and kind of learn more about what workplace actually is. So excited to be here and discuss universal design.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Omar. And then Lisa.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. Lisa Kong, I'm a principal at DLR Group. I lead our workplace practice in the California region, which includes 5 offices. I've been with DLR Group for almost 2 years now. Prior to that, I was with Gensler for 19 years, leading their hospitality interior practice in Los Angeles. So my background is mostly in hospitality, and then I left to work with a client actually on some high-end retail and hospitality projects. And then I came back to the design side because I'm just really passionate about designing for wellness for everybody, not just the people who can afford to stay at expensive hotels. And so that really plays into this whole idea of universal design, which ultimately I think results in wellness for everybody. So I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lisa. Certainly appreciate 3 panelists joining us. And then Andrew, could you just introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Nick. It's great to be on this panel session, and I hope to learn some great takeaways from our guests. I'm Andrew Baxter. I've been with Space Door 15 years now. I'm working with our clients in the Europe and the UK region in the main, and very interested to see the changes in the workplace, but how we can capture and embed universal design in the kind of return to work phase of things. Looking forward to some great shares on this. So glad to be here today. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'm Nick Stedman, VP Marketing. Been here 23 years or so, various roles. Very interested in the massive change that's been happening in our industry, especially in the last, say, 7 years, and then accelerated again during the pandemic and out of it the other side. And very interested in this subject in particular. I think it's highly relevant right now, and it is a question or a concern amongst many controllers of Workspace on how to design to fit everybody and cater for everybody. So we're very enthusiastic about this session today. Do get involved. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat, and we will endeavour to answer them all throughout this session. Otherwise, let's get started. I think the first question really is, what is universal design? I think it's perhaps commonly misunderstood by many, and I'll be very interested in the panel's own interpretation of that. And I'm going to start with Omar, actually, because I know this is something that you're very passionate about in particular. What would your definition be of universal design and how it applies?
Oh God, yeah. Thanks for calling on me first. That's really great. No, I think it's there's always going to be, like, I think, a million definitions or a million implementations of what universal design is. To me, universal design is designing for the most users possible or the most use cases possible, right? And that's really a quite difficult thing to do. And, like, equitable use is a really, really important principle of universal design. But I think that when we talk about workplace specifically, we want to make sure that everyone feels welcome and everyone has an equal level, or an equitable level, I should say, of service within a workplace. And that's really, really difficult to do sometimes because you're trying to design for, like, your edge cases as well. But I do think it's achievable if you put the effort in. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is the effort. But to me, universal design is all about creating equity within the workplace. And that is difficult to do when you're a global company, especially when you're working in different regions, different regulations, different historic standards, et cetera. But I think that it is something that is vital for companies to understand, especially as we go into this next phase of workplace, whatever it winds up looking like. Employees and employers have a responsibility, but employees, I think, have higher standards than ever before because they have been working from home for the past 18, 19 months now, and they understand more about what their needs are. And so it falls on the employers to kind of meet those needs now. So we're in an interesting, I think, phase of workplace. I think probably the most exciting time that we've been in a long time.
Yeah, I agree. An interesting point you make there about many coming from a home working environment. Many, not all, but many have optimized their own environment, so it's perfect for them. And so you've got to bring all that together when you're talking about one workplace where everybody comes together. Lisa, you used an interesting word. We were talking about this today, weren't we? Around empathy. You say a bit more about that.
Well, yeah, and to kind of add on to what Omar is saying, I think employees now are more empowered than ever because they have had this time to sort of realize what their priorities are. And so there's a much greater impetus on employers to create a workplace where people will really feel welcome and want to come to, because now everybody has a choice. But yes, I think besides designing for all the broadest user case, which universal design is for, it's for accessibility, it's making sure that you haven't built in any implicit bias in the design that you've created for people. But I think just based on what we've all been going through, there's an additional component, I think, of designing with empathy for not just any accessibility, but for any kind of neurodiversity that people may have. We've all discovered new sensitivities that we didn't realize we had before. You know, suddenly people feel really uncomfortable being in crowds or in big open spaces. So I think really thinking about the demographics and the psychographics of your users and putting yourself in their shoes, even just coming up with some personas and doing a day in the life really helps you be empathetic to somebody else's sensitivities, somebody else's situation. Because we tend to design for ourselves. I mean, or that's usually our base point. You know what you like, you know what works for you. But really putting yourself in somebody else's shoes can help you achieve universal design, I think, much easier. Yeah,
that's good. I like that. In someone else's shoes and empathetic. I think some really good points made there. What about you, Susan? I know that you're equally as passionate about this.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much exactly like Umar said, right? It's the equitable that is so key in terms of universal design and creating spaces. And I think, again, like Lisa said, employees are empowered now. They have a choice. I mean, we have 85,000 employees around the world. We are competing with their homes now with the office, right? So we have 85,000 offices and the general office that we work in. So it's really how do you create that space where it's not just it's intuitive too. So it's got a lot of choices. People want to come back to, but in terms of having that seamless experience, so really kind of looking at experience, the angle of experience. So in ways where when people come into the office, there is that experience where it's not difficult to find their way around. It's much more easier to just get on with stuff and help their productivity, right? So I think universal design, it's a big thing, but what we've done at Standard Chartered Bank, we've not stayed to try and figure out what's going on. We do the fail fast kind of methodology, but what that means is we pretty much gone and reviewed our standards to support our employees with hybrid working. But we've kind of really gone that step ahead and really kind of experimenting different things. But yeah, it's very exciting times.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Thank you for your inputs there. And there's so many aspects to this, isn't there? And we tend to think of universal design being about disability or the wheelchair. It's the classic one, isn't it? But there are just so many elements which can be thought about if we're empathetic. And I know that you've done some exercises, Omar, haven't you, about actually bringing in people into and testing these out with feedback. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously at Miro, what we're doing is holding what we call workshops, where we're really holding them online with Miro, obviously Miro boards for each individual hub, and getting employee input to figure out what their exact needs are for each individual group. I think this is just the beginning stage of things for Miro, because the workplace org at Miro is very, very new, about 6 months old. And there's just the very beginning of a journey. There's a lot of future things to even think about just beyond the initial kind of needs finding. I think, we talk about universal design and we start thinking beyond like the initial fact finding. Obviously you have to involve your employees in the process. But then you have to pick the right design partners externally, because you're never going to have all the intelligence you need internally at your company, especially as a small startup. So you need to find the right partners to partner with externally to educate your internal groups about things like designing for people with color blindness and other things that just are like unseen issues that we need to figure out and we need to design for, which usually when people are designing things like signage or graphics in a space, they don't really consider. And I think it's one of those things that's really vital to actually think about in the future. But I think it's like we're just the beginning stage of this at Miro. But obviously there's like a lot of things that we need to be bringing external partners in for to help kind of bridge that gap of knowledge and make sure that our employees understand that there's other things that we are thinking about, but also to help suss out some of that stuff. Because sometimes people don't even think about the things they need immediately unless they're asked the right questions to help kind of pull some of that information out of them. So we're doing the initial stages of that right now, and then there's going to be like a long 2-year roadmap to kind of keep that work going, and the fail fast iterative approach or the design thinking approach, using that to actually kind of continue to iterate upon the spaces as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. And just a question for you: how do you find out all these individual needs? Like many of them, do you poll your staff regularly, or do you get them to experiment or even hack their own space to give you this feedback on what works and what doesn't?
Yeah, so the company's been holding, because obviously the company Miro grew from 300 to 1,000 people over 18 months. It's like, then no one had worked in the office or a hub before. The majority of employees had not worked in a hub before. So for us, it was about holding hubathons, because we couldn't be in the physical space yet, holding hubathons, as we called them, to get people to start thinking about their needs and start kind of assessing. And it started out very base, and people were like, oh, well, I need an ergonomic chair and I need a sit-stand desk. And once you meet their initial needs, then you can start getting into the other things that they don't realize they need. You have to kind of move up the pyramid. Because initially they're just going to tell you like, oh, I just need like food, water, and a desk. But that's the most base level of things, right? Like delivering the basics should be a non-negotiable at this point. We need to move beyond that, but we have to start somewhere.
Yeah, and there was an interesting point when we were discussing this earlier in the week, that there'll be many workers out there which have never known anything else but working from home. So we're 18, 19 months into the pandemic. that would be the entire person's career. They may not even know what is and isn't available within a workspace because they've never worked in one. What's your view on that, Susan?
I mean, absolutely true, right? So what we are doing really, like just to ensure that, so having a standard with Workplace, it's helped, right? So you are creating that consistency. But to your point, Nick, where staff have joined us through the pandemic over the last 2 years, what we are doing is we're using solutions which is really, using tech to support us, but really having inductions which kind of walk through the spaces in real time to kind of show them what to experience when they come back to the office. But that's just a start, right? Eventually, it is when they come in, how do they kind of support it through community host, all those kind of solutions. But it's again, testing times, experimenting as we go. But it's definitely a need in terms of especially getting the new folks in, new employees in, and really getting them feel connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good points. Yeah. So are we going to say something there, Lisa? Or?
Oh, no, just agree with everything Suzanne just said.
Yeah, good. Okay, no, there's some good points made there. Now, a question which comes up regularly is this: is universal design expensive? There's one for you, Lisa.
I don't think it has to be. Just like sustainable design doesn't have to be expensive. I think that if you're designing with empathy, it's just about making choices. So if it's choosing one chair over another, I think that there are so many options and products out in the world that offer a range of size and fit for all types of people. So when it comes to the things that you put in the space, the options are really limitless. So it's just finding the ones that offer the most variety, the most flexibility. I think right now it could be expensive if you're trying to test out different scenarios, especially if you're building hard architecture. So I think it's important to design with flexibility in mind, knowing that you might want to improve or modify a space. Like Suzanne said, they're testing things out, failing fast. We're finding that our clients are wanting that flexibility built into the design. And so, yes, that can be expensive if you're putting up walls and tearing them down again. So you have to go into it knowing that and plan for that flexibility so that you're not paying for it, over and over and over again every 6 months when you decide that you need to tweak something. So I think it's just planning for it can keep it from being expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
Yeah, and if I can just add there too, Nick, I think, universal design and sustainability as well is often like, I think people sometimes think of it as expensive, but there's actually nothing more expensive than hiring new employees. And if you have employees who have needs that are like very specific and you don't meet those needs, you're going to lose those employees. And in knowledge worker world, replacing an individual employee can sometimes cost up to $50,000 worth of recruiting. That's the average, right? Like higher level employees, the number just keeps going up. So is it worth more to just meet universal design standards and try to do a better job? Or is it, it's kind of like you're spending money in one way to lose it in another. So I think it makes sense to invest in your space for the long term. Obviously, you can take an iterative approach and still do this smartly. But I think, it takes the work to actually figure out what that looks like. But yeah, I think the business case is definitely there for it.
Really good point.
And if I can add, right, Omar, because the reality is you end up being a very competitive employer by already thinking ahead. So maybe if not, you don't have a disabled employee or, in the ways you're planning it. But by setting that standard already, that employees have that option. So they'll be attracted to come to join you.
Yeah, good. No, that's a good point. And sometimes it's a really simple decision. It could just be the size of a chair. You were saying, Lisa, couldn't it?
It could be extremely simple. And I think those are the things that you may not think about necessarily, that, the width of this chair is built for a certain size person. And so taking away that limitation or really being empathetic to the person that's coming in that maybe wants a little bit more space or needs a little bit more space, or so not designing that in, not designing in any implicit bias, and also providing options so that that's not the only chair in the room is really important.
And I think too, Lisa, I think internally, right? Like you have to design, companies need to design processes that don't get in the way of that, right? Like if an employee needs something and they're saying, we should be trusting our employees to be adults and be requesting things that they actually need, right? So we should be saying like, yeah, okay, we shouldn't put a procurement process in the way that's difficult or makes it hard for that person to get the things they need. It should be easy for the employee to get the things they need and the things they require to do their job better. Because if we empower employees to do their job better, it's better for companies. So, like you can also like design a really great space, but then you can have really bad process that gets between the employee and the things they actually need that you designed for.
I think part of it too is providing, as part of workplace design, some level of an operational sort of, whether it's an IT concierge or it's a facilities concierge, a place where they know, something's not working today. My keyboard isn't working for me today. I'm going to go to the IT concierge and get the right keyboard or the right chair, or I'm going to find the right desk for me so that I can curate my day. So we're finding that that's a really important programmatic element into the spaces that we design, is having that place where employees feel like they have somebody ready to help them immediately if they need to tweak something.
Very interesting. We were talking a bit about experiments and so on. Do you have a specified area or a particular area where you're working out and trying different things, Omar? Like a experimentation lab or somewhere like that?
I mean, everywhere, the world is our experimental lab. No, actually, it's funny because I think the design lead from our team, or from my team, is on the call right now, and I'm like, he's like everywhere, probably everywhere. But no, so I think Miro has spun up, I think 7 hubs in the past 6 months. We're now at 11 locations globally, and so I think that at the beginning of the pandemic we were at 3. And we're obviously taking down space very quickly. So each hub is actually doing its own little experiments and doing its own little iterations on different items. And specifically, then we're taking the learnings from those different hubs as each project's rolling behind the other one and trying to quickly iterate on some of those items. So, for example, our design team manager, Jose Sudero, brought in a new company to do some furniture items for us in Amsterdam. We moved into a space immediately in mid-September in Amsterdam. Across 4 floors. We got employee feedback about the furniture. His team turned around a solution in a month and a half, and now there's ergonomic furniture on all those floors based on employee feedback, using a different vendor that we brought on board, or I should say he brought on board, he found. And so it's really, really amazing the iterative speed that's, one, demanded, but 2, that you can bring when you're kind of still like a little bit nimble and you're like in the still startup mode. Is it difficult? Yes. Is it taxing? Absolutely. I'm sure Jose's on the line. He's tired. But I think that in some ways there's a very interesting like ability to kind of iterate globally when you're scaling quickly in different offices. I think Miro definitely looks forward to the day when they just have like a workplace experimental lab and they can just tinker in there and like try out different solutions before releasing them into the wild. But sometimes you have to test out in the field.
Yeah. Interesting point.
Interesting listening.
We're finding that for clients that have the ability to do just maybe a floor, that they're testing something on one floor, and on that floor there's a number of different versions and different workshop spaces or scenarios, and trying to get feedback on that floor before they do the next one, kind of like what Omar was just describing. So we're seeing a lot more phasing in our projects, so that they understand that they can learn from the space before just doing the whole thing all at once. And so that's another way to cut down on the expense. Test it out on this floor and then roll it out on the others. So
yeah, that's interestingly. So we're seeing that a lot with lots of clients, that kind of test bed scenario. You've got one floor that probably looks a bit of a mishmash on day one because you're testing all these different things, but hopefully it comes. I'm really interested in what Suzanne and Omar, you both mentioned this word experience so much when we're talking about the office and the work or the workspace. Should we say the office workspace rather than the home? And I'll be interested in your views. I was just reflecting on it yesterday. Do you think there's more universal design built into hospitality and these other sectors than the workplace sometimes? I was in a cab in London yesterday. I was talking to the cab driver. It's always interesting to say, look, how are you seeing the week? How busy is it on which days? And he said, you know what? He said, the weekends are crazy at the moment. He said, it shows that people can come into town, come into the city and enjoy the leisure and the hospitality when they really want to. And it sort of hit me. What are we doing in the workspace? Are we attracting everyone back in enough, or is there a certain pull about those other places? So interested in thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Andrew, I think you've nailed it, right? And what I mean by that is if you look at workplace experience, it's now come to the forefront. Everybody's talking about it. And it is really really entwined with design. So I think Lisa made that point, right? In terms of not just curating, so you have your universal design, but then by thinking after that, what happens after that? And, like community hosts, or what we have something called a guru bar, where our tech team sit there, and if anybody has an issue, they can go and get that sorted. But it's really kind of ensuring to think, or maybe mostly think about the touch points. How is this going to work overall? And I think that's the piece which really it's kind of entwined. It's not just the design, but thinking after that, how it will work for end users. And Omar spoke about like running hackathons and stuff like that. We've done pretty much the same thing, but really to understand what is the customer needs, how will they use the space, and then taking that and trying stuff out. So most recently, we've done something where it's an activity-based working setup for a trader flow. And now that's something that would never happen in the past, right? But we've seen where there are support teams within the trader flow. We've tried to take them all together and create an activity-based setup so they can go hybrid too. So these are things that we're testing out. We're trying it out, seeing how it succeeds. If it succeeds, we roll it out to other locations.
If I could just add on to that. Oh, sorry, Omar.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Coming from the hospitality world, Andrew, I think that's actually a really good point, and something that I like to think about. And Suzanne, you hit the nail on the head with touch points. And that's something that we look at in hospitality is, what is the guest touch point? Even before they've left their home, what are their expectations about coming to the workplace? And so I think, you really want to reward people for coming in. It should be like a destination. It should feel like a sense of arrival. And so really thinking about it from a hospitality perspective, I think is what will make people want to come in and feel rewarded for making the trip. Because these days, it could be quite taxing to take mass transportation to get to the office. You're dealing with all different kinds of sensitivities that, like I said before, we may not have had before. And so when you get there, there should definitely be a reward, a sense of arrival, something for everybody. I think it's really important to look at it that way.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. I think it's part of I think really what this is, there's a lot of talk about this in economics and different things right now, but really what we're seeing is an acceleration of trends that have been brewing a little bit in the background before the pandemic, right? So it's like a 7-year acceleration or whatever. And before the pandemic, there were a number of teams who were already doing workplace experience work and really focusing more on, I think, the combination of residential and commercial. And you saw this in a lot of the buy-ups of smaller residential companies by larger furniture purveyors, et cetera. And I think now that we're bringing hospitality into it, I think it's even going a bit further, and where the workplace becomes a destination, especially for teams that are remote first versus, office first. Being remote first or office first doesn't necessarily mean you don't work remotely sometimes or you don't work in the office sometimes. That's not true. There's no real such thing as hybrid, I don't think. There's just you have one standard way of working, and then you do the rest of the stuff you do is the rest of the time. But I think with hospitality in mind, when the workplace is a destination, especially if you're remote first, for example, you have this ability to create a space where people are coming and gathering and really deliver something where people are gathering and working from in a more universal way. I do think though that like the empathy portion is thought about a lot more in hospitality design. So I'm excited to see it come into workplace more because, of course there's bad design in every industry, hospitality included. But for like the really well done hospitality spaces, I think, universal design is definitely thought of a lot more because of that service and standard of care you see in hospitality. And I think back to a time where I was working with an accessibility consultant in New York City, and he himself was in a wheelchair. And I remember like going to meet him at the sidewalk, and we were in a historic building, and it was like the middle of winter in New York City, helping him get out of his cab, helping him get onto the sidewalk, going through the entire space. We used to do walks of spaces with him. This was at Atlassian. We'd do like runarounds of spaces with him before we actually opened them to make sure there were no other issues after he consulted. And just the extra time it took to like get him inside the space, and then like after lunch going out and like getting him to like helping him to get a cab, helping to get him in the cab, like the extra things he had to go through was a great exercise in empathy for me to understand like a different user journey that is not part of my life. And I think that's part of what hospitality designers think about, and that's why I think again you need the right partners externally to help you as a workplace person kind of think about these things, because without that consultant's expertise and help and just life experience, I wouldn't understand it. And now I have a better understanding of it, and I can help to implement that in the future.
Yeah, very interesting. So we're kind of morphing real estate and HR into one very close-knit experiential kind of department, aren't we? Because I know it's so interesting if you reflect on why would I want to go to that hospitality or leisure venue if we're thinking about our teams in our workspaces as needing to attract them, like you say, to the hub in that way, not just for the gain of the business, yes, so that's always there, but also for their own experience and their own well-being. I've got a bit of a random one, but I want to ask it, I want to throw it in. So again, I'm going back to my black cab driver. I was asking him who different passengers he has, and he said, look, I had one guy, he's a head of an insurance company, and he was really quite upset because his workers just weren't coming back. And he was talking to two of them who said, look, they want full-time work from home. One of them had actually moved his home up to Scotland from London during COVID, and his boss didn't know, but he's working from home, so he could do that anywhere. And the other one said, and I've done a bit of research on this now, and he said, the trouble is I've bought a puppy, and I need to work from home because of my puppy. Now, evidently, there's about 3 million extra dogs have been bought. Puppies have been bought in the UK during lockdown. It just made me think, what do you guys think about stretching universal designs for having pets in the workplace?
Or children?
Let's start on pets.
I think that's awesome. You typically only see that in entertainment or tech or the creative industries. You think about how important it was for those people to have that puppy during the pandemic. It gave them a sense of warmth and caring and love. So it's enhancing their wellness. If you could bring that into the workplace and your workplace could accommodate that, I think kudos, bravo, if you can do it.
And I would totally agree with you, Lisa. I mean, if we can do it, I mean, I think the challenge will still be that that landlord, or depending on what your lease agreements state, because we'd love to do it, but we have clauses in our agreements in various different locations that doesn't allow us to do it. So I think that's the bit where I think we still have to have that engagement and see how we can make that happen. But definitely it'll be one of your ways of, increasing wellness and really getting people back, because given the fact that people have had to work from home, it was not necessarily a choice, right? They've had to work from home for the last 2 years. They've set themselves up. They know what works. They know how the setting is. So things like kids or puppies, if we can find ways to kind of, embrace that in the workplace and find solutions for it, it will go a long way, I would think.
Yeah, I think you're right, Susan. I think it does come down to, so one, there's the landlords, right? And then two, I think it comes down to employee retention and employee recruitment, right? Because you have this you know, if you think about it, like just children alone, right? You know, there's already such an issue with getting parents back into the workforce, specifically mothers. And we want to be able to make sure those people feel welcome coming back to the office and feel accommodated in a way where they're able to do that, right? And that was an issue before the pandemic. It's gotten worse now. And that's very, very important. And if we think about it, right, designing for those use cases and on a team agreement level, I think is really important, right? And a management level, giving people tools to have those conversations is really important because, for example, with dogs, right, like I love dogs, have a dog, like bringing her to the office, but not everyone loves dogs. And sometimes people feel sheepish about saying, I don't love dogs, or I'm allergic to dogs, or I was bit by a dog when I was a kid. And so it's important to have those team level conversations. You can have your universal design of having dogs are allowed, but then also have a conversation with your team and like teach people to have those conversations about like, hey, everybody, are we cool about having dogs? And someone might then feel comfortable saying like, hey, yeah, like actually this happened, I'm not. And then it's more of a team discussion. And I think that's really important in design, is to like teach people to like, you know, design for universal accessibility, but then also design for like the specific needs of those teams individually.
Yeah, good. No, thank you. I'm just interested in the responses. We've got a wide range of experience, and it's current, so that's good to hear.
And sorry, Andrew, on your other question about like the person being upset about their people not wanting to come back, I would suggest that person looks inward at their company and figure out why people aren't coming back, right? So it's like, what are you doing as an employer that's making your employees, and if your employees want to work remotely and they've been productive this entire time, maybe you should look and do like a survey and figure out what that looks like for your company and like why they want to work remotely, and can they be just as productive? You have to do that work in order to actually figure it out. And I think the biggest mistake employers are making right now is telling people what to do, because the natural reaction of any human, if you tell them what to do, is to do the opposite. And that's going to be a bad result for most employers. But I think, you know, for example, Susan's company will be happy to hire those people because they're obviously doing the work, make sure their employees are happy.
Yeah, but to your point, right, Mar, it's really what we've done is when we said hybrid, but it's really a home or an office, but we have a near home solution too. But it's really to the point where you give them a choice, and you got to mean it. And what I mean by that, we've got it right. The mandate has come right from the top. Senior management are totally 100% committed to allowing people to, you know, giving them the choice of working from home or from the office or near home. But it really kind of builds that trust. But it's also, there's a big element where people leaders have to play a part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the job of management has gotten much more difficult, and we need much more education for management for that reason. But I think you're right. There's a remote advocate named Chris Hurd on Twitter who was discussing this idea that, like, you know, you will really only have two modes of operation. Your primary mode of operation is either remote or office first. What you do in between is what you do in between, right? Like I could be remote first and work from home, and that's my primary mode of operation, but I could still be going to meetings with Lisa, or going to meet with other vendors, or going to meet like externally, or traveling for work and going to visit another office. But still my primary mode of operation is X, and so I should have myself set up for success doing X. I think that's hard for companies to get their mind around, I think, right now, is that they need to enable all these different modes of work, but then people have a primary mode of work.
And it's really important for companies to figure this out, isn't it? I think you mentioned earlier statistic, was it 3 out of 5 business owners haven't worked out what's going to happen post-pandemic.
Yeah, what they're doing, what their plans are post-pandemic, whatever that looks like, whatever that is, in whatever region you're in specifically, because obviously we're all on different clocks now.
Exactly, but that's massive, isn't it? But that has to be done, because we're not going to go back to where we were. It is going to be different, and it may be for some companies that it is everyone back in the workspace, and that's what works best. But for the majority, it's going to totally change, isn't it? And that balance and how many are in, and who are in, and the types of roles that work best remotely and in the workspace and so on, that all needs to be figured out, doesn't it?
I think there's a big range too that needs to be considered. So you have generationally, there are preferences. that are completely different between, you know, the ages of 20 and say 70 people, age 70 of people that are working. You know, boomers have a preference for when they come into the office and why they come into the office. And we're finding that it's completely the opposite for Gen Z or millennials. And so you kind of have to design for that whole range of multi-generational preferences, multi-generational levels of empowerment, expectation. Besides universal design, add this other layer of this new empowerment and preferences. You have to consider all of it.
So if you've got somebody who's not sure where to start, okay, so maybe budgets are low, but we need to do something. What are the basics we can put in place? What doesn't cost much but has the biggest effect?
I think asking your employees what they want is the lowest cost, highest reward thing you could possibly do. It doesn't cost you anything to send a survey to your employees. Crafting a survey can be done fairly easily. There's tons of them on the internet already at this point because everyone's experimenting with hybrid right now. Yeah, low cost, very high reward, and then you'll have a place to start because then you can start looking at the data and trying to figure out maybe I think, you know, there's this amazing book I've been reading by Adam Grant called Think Again. And maybe you should like take a second once you get that employee feedback. And if you're thinking one way, maybe that'll sway you in a different direction, show you that maybe the way you, the executive team, were thinking might be different. So I think that's, or the decision makers, whoever they are. But I think that's the best first step.
Good answer. Yeah. Yeah, good. There's a question come in here from one of our listeners. Are you as panelists seeing more appetite for incorporating universal design now rather than pre-COVID, as the whole workspace is being reimagined anyway? Do you want to take that one, Suzanne?
Yeah, sure. And I think one point which I've not really covered. So diversity and inclusion is very big on the agenda of Standard Chartered Bank. So it's not new. It's stuff that we've been doing for a while, but now it's come to the forefront. What do we do and make it better? So universal design, yes, it's part of it, and it's really become more real. So it's part of our standards. We've reviewed whether it's not just good enough to create spaces to collaborate, right? But really understand what's the user's needs and tailor it around that. So it has definitely become very real, more real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Thank you. You got a view on that, Lisa?
Yeah, I think probably yes, more now after the pandemic than before, because I think, like I said, the pandemic has brought a lot of things to light that maybe we didn't consider before. Accessibility was, a standard, it's a given, it's built into most of the codes. But I think beyond that, really being empathetic and thinking about different neurodiversity, as Omar mentioned, even like color blindness, sound sensitivities, crowd sensitivities. And I think a lot of those things, we all discovered that we had those sensitivities during the pandemic that we didn't know we had before. And so I do think more now, post-pandemic, is universal design just even that much more important.
So it has made an impact. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Another question that's come in from Fabiola. From your experience, what has been some forward-thinking office changes that are equitable and universal that you have designed for your clients or implemented in your own office? Could you take that one, Omar?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Miro is still at the very, very beginning of our journey, so we're just starting to get our first spaces spun up. I think as far as forward-thinking office changes, I think anything that is being done right now for our teams at Miro is we're moving up the hierarchy of needs. So we're meeting that base need for all the employees, starting to get their input and starting to get I think that's the thing to me that wasn't done as early for most companies I've been at before, where you're starting to get the needs of the employees very early and running a lot of these sessions as a young company versus later on, usually you're just running so fast and you're oh, well, we've opened offices, we're doing our best we can, and we're trying to figure it out later. I think here we're kind of building the car at the same time as we're driving it, which is hard. But I think that for me, the best thing we've been working on, and like Jose from our design team has been working on this actively like the past quarter, is getting that work from home program really set up as well. Because obviously we have employees who are going to continue to work from home a few days a week at Miro, but getting that kind of like more specific setups and more ergonomic setups for employees as work from home becomes normalized is something that I think is definitely a different kind of experience and a different kind of thing that I think is definitely more forward thinking. Previously, you would never really like touch an employee's home. You'd be like, okay, yeah, use your corporate credit card, you get a stipend, here's your thing. But I think now there's more solutions that are available. I think that to me is the best way to create like equity for people in an overall experience is to give them the same setup at home or a good setup at home. And then you can actually like learn from what they're doing at home and bring that information back to the office and say like, okay, well, here's all the work from home setups we've done for our 85,000 employees. That's a lot of employees, Suzanne, that number scares me. And like Susan's doing, and then say, here's the data from our 85,000 employee work from home setups. Now we have all that information to use in our offices, and we can use that information to kind of iterate again. So I think that to me is like the most equitable and forward thinking thing that we're currently doing, is working on that work from home setup and trying to get that set up at the same time as setting up the current offices. It's kind of like double work actually, but I think it'll be rewarding in the end.
That's fascinating. I love it. So actually use what they have done, find out what they've done, what are doing at home, and bring that into the office. Yeah, great.
I'd love to add on to that. On the design side, what we've been seeing too is during for hybrid work, you want to make sure that being in the office or being at home is equitable for both users. And I think it used to be before the pandemic, you might be in a meeting and everybody'd be sitting in the meeting room except maybe one person who happened to be working from home. And now that meeting is, 6 people in person and 5 people working from home. And it's a completely different experience. And so one of our clients is really set on making that meeting equitable for all participants. And so their policy is if one person is on Zoom, everybody's on Zoom. And so what you have to do to design for that equity is enough spaces in the office that they can be on Zoom as an individual where everybody's got the Brady Bunch screen like this. But beyond that, you have to think about the technology so that you're not, if you are all in a room, is the microphone echoing on top of each other? You have to build in the right acoustics. You have to design enough spaces where all of those people can be on Zoom and not be talking over their neighbors who are trying to work quietly and who are not on Zoom. So it's a real challenge. The technology is really difficult, but some of the solutions are really, we call them Zoom villages, where we've got a series of, 40 phone booths scattered throughout a floor so that all of those people could be on calls at any given time and not be interrupting their colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Thank you. Susan, were you going to say something just then?
I wasn't, but I might as well say something now. No, but I totally agree with Lisa, and I think that's the struggle, right? It's the inclusivity. It's a different way of working. It's the fact that like some folks from the office and some from home. And what's also proved, what we've also seen is people who work from home have a stronger, stable connection with their network compared to landing in the office. So that's a challenge in itself. But it's a tech challenge. But again, in terms of video conferencing solutions and stuff like that, there's so much variety now come into the market. But we have to ensure that whatever we are setting up in the office, it's all compatible. We are also looking at every user. So for boardroom style, every user is having their own screens with their own mic. So even if people are joining from home, they have that same kind of experience. So a lot of experimentation, but totally agree. There is a need for inclusivity now.
Very good. Yeah, excellent. That whole equitable experience, especially around Zoom calls and so on, that's a whole subject on its own. We could spend a lot of time just on that, but that is so important to get right. And yes, as Lisa's saying, there are technical challenges right now, but there will be solutions, and I'm sure there are solutions out there. Some excellent questions. Thank you. We've just got 10 minutes left. If anyone has a further question, please pop it in the chat and we'll pick it up and answer it. I do There is one other question with regard to implementing universal design on top of a workspace, which has maybe recently been redesigned. Is this something that you can just simply layer on top, or do you have to build this in right from the beginning? Any offers to take that one?
I can start. I think that you can layer it on top, although you might have to edit before you add. So I think, you'll have to evaluate, especially in an existing space. And that's what, most people are starting with right now is their existing space. And how are they modifying it for a hybrid environment for universal design? And so really understanding where it might not currently meet universal design standards, I think is really important as a starting point. You have to audit the space first to see if there's anything that's not working. Then edit that, fix those things, and then layer on the things that you're adding to the space to bring it up to the level of what it should be for universal design. I don't know, do you agree, Susan?
Yeah, totally, Lisa. And I think now we have advantages like BIM, for example, right? In a way, you can, provided you understand what the user's requirements are, you can pretty much model that and really try to be creative and ensure that you are covering for what they need, their needs are. And so you can still, like to your point, let's layer it, right? But it can be done. It's not as difficult as 3 years ago or 10 years ago, where you had to literally, everything was start fresh and try to figure it out. So it's got better to make it happen, but it definitely can be done. But it's better to do it right from the start. But if you can't, there's always an opportunity.
Yeah, good.
I was going to say, I think Lisa and Susan are absolutely right, but I think that also like the part that always falls off the most, I think, and this is because teams are moving too fast. Internally at companies, teams are always moving too fast because the companies are scaling too fast. I think, coming back then and making sure that the fixes you put in place actually work, and then, continuing that process, that feedback loop has to keep going. And I think that's the biggest thing that companies don't build into their processes is keeping their partners on board for after the process finishes to then help them kind of iterate on it a little bit. Because otherwise, the architect, no offense, walks away because their contract's over, not because they want to walk away, but then they don't really actually like make sure that things have actually worked. And there winds up being some sort of team internally who tries to fix it a little bit, and they're like MacGyvering things. And MacGyvering things works really well on the TV, but not so much in real life. So
yeah, and I think, yeah, sorry, Lisa, go on.
I was going to say, just coming from the design side, you're absolutely right, Omar. We would want to stay in that loop. We need that information for the next one. That's how you get better.
And that's where, to your point, right, Mar, change management is key. And it's often a forgotten thought, like, why pay for change management? But the fact that you have change management right from the start, trying to understand what the needs is, and then, once you have your design, but taking it back and really, going back and forth to just ensure you got it really foolproofed. Often it's a forgotten thought, but really I would recommend change management is key for throughout this process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Change management is a bit of a forgotten art sometimes.
Yeah, very, very good points. And again, we could talk at length on that in particular. So in brief, yes, it can be layered. It might need some editing, and it might need iterations, but it can be done, and do it, and do try it, do start it. I think that's the overriding message there. Yeah, good. One more question here. Are workplace solution providers doing enough to provide solutions that cater to true inclusivity? Are you qualified to answer that one, Lisa?
I think everybody's learning, and I think it's iterative even on the side of providing solutions. I think that there is a lot of research out there, and a good workplace solution provider is constantly doing research. I know that at my firm, we are always looking at the latest, studies and articles that have been written. We're constantly sharing them so that we are always at the cutting edge of what's being learned about this, so that when we're talking to clients, we have the latest knowledge. So I think it's really, the onus is on the solution provider to be at the forefront and know everything that's going on, and not just be following trends, but forecasting them, trying to pre-solve for some issues that haven't even come up yet. I think it's really on the solution providers to be looking forward and finding what's going to be coming down the pipeline that we're going to need to solve for, not just waiting for it to hit our doorstep.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that furniture manufacturers also bear responsibility there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you talk about anybody who is a, designer, myself being an industrial designer, like if you're a designer and you're designing things, you have a responsibility for the people that you're designing those things for, right? It's like that is the responsibility of a designer or someone who's a creator, is you're creating something. That is your responsibility. I do think though that like for less seasoned internal people, right? Like absolutely, like Lisa, you're right. Like people like, you should be coming in with like the expertise and like pushing inclusivity and like helping them to understand why that's important. But I think for more seasoned professionals who are coming into companies and like their responsibility internally is to be just as educated as you all, if not like more responsibility to help educate people internally to help kind of drive that change and teach people why it's important. And so I think, we have to be the standard bearers internally, and then, at the same time, find those partners externally who are doing the same thing so that we can kind of create that better solution together.
We agree. Good. Okay, one more question. I'll make this the last. This is coming from LinkedIn Live. So would ventilation now come into universal design? Interesting one. So many people feel at risk coming back into the workplace due to underlying illness. So that's an interesting question. What do you think, Suzanne?
I think there's a holistic approach, right? When we say universal design, everything that impacts the employee matters. So yes, ventilation, I mean, something that I came across recently was access points. Even like, because like we have private walls and stuff, being a bank and stuff like that, it's quite interesting. Even private like access points where disabled access, which you would think, yeah, it's all fine because everybody can walk through it, but it's not simple as that. So looking at it holistically of how it applies to users and really getting back to that touch point, because that is pretty key. So I really do think there is a change. It's definitely happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry. I think having access to or improving ventilation systems is extremely important if you want to, obviously get people back into the space. I think, this is the complication, right? Is like a lot of companies don't necessarily have the money on hand to go and upgrade all the ventilation systems. And I think then they have to start thinking about, okay, well, what can we do to upgrade this, or how can we work with our landlord to upgrade this, or what solutions can we provide? But I think, again, it just takes it back to the original point I was making earlier, which was employees are more informed than ever before about workplace, and they understand workplace needs more than ever before. And so our challenge as designers and creators and people who are making these spaces internally and externally is to meet those needs. And that's more difficult than ever. And I think it's actually a great challenge.
Yeah, good point. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. We've got 1 minute to go. We want to make sure we finish this on time in respect to our listeners. Thank you so much. Really appreciate our panelists, Lisa and Omar and Suzanne. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all our listeners as well. And I hope this has been informative. Certainly has been for me. We'd love to see you back at our next panel, which we'll be hosting towards the end of November. Also, if you're in the UK, we will be at the Workspace Design Show in London on the 4th and the 5th. That's next week. We'd love to see you there if you are in the area. But otherwise, thank you so much. Good morning, good day, and good night, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great to talk
Thanks
to
a lot.
you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.